Hello and welcome. My name is Stan Lemons. I'm with thesecrettowriting.com, and I am absolutely delighted to have you all join us. Today marks the beginning of our new program, Chat with an Author. And I tell you what, I couldn't be more excited than to have a longtime friend, someone that I've known for just probably 35, 40 years, join us today, Mr. David Ritz. A quick anecdote, and then we'll jump right in. When I was in high school or college, I went out from Dallas to LA to visit David with my friend, with his nephew, or yes, and had a absolute wonderful time. And I remember him being so warm and welcoming and to me. And I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that feeling. And that feeling has been true for the last for all these years, when I periodically, every now and then, will pop in and to say hello via email, largely, to David. But with that aside, he was so gracious to agree to help me with the launch of our new program, and so I'm so delighted to have him. And so, David, I turn to you and I say, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. And let me, just as a way of, I mean, in talking to someone like you, it's kind of like, wow, where do you begin? There's so much to tell. So maybe I think a good way to begin is to turn the mic to you and just have you introduce yourself.
All right.
And share with the audience kind of who you are and what do you do.
Well, I appreciate it, and like I say, I appreciate the time and the attention. I'm a writer of different genres. I mainly make my living as a ghost writer, which is to say I write books channeling the voice of others. My main interest has been African American music, because as a kid I just loved it. I loved jazz and gospel music, and growing up in New York, and then I moved to Dallas when I was 12 and a half, and heard gospel and blues and new jazz from having lived in New York. So anyway, went to college, went to UT undergraduate, went to the State University of New York at Buffalo, got an MA in comparative and English and Italian literature, was going to be an academic, got sort of bored, changed up, moved to Dallas, began an ad agency because I wanted to make a lot of money. Ad agency did okay with a couple of my pals, got bored again and got the bug to write. Started by writing local journalism for D Magazine and Texas monthly magazines, but began to understand that it was hard making a living as a journalist, and made up my mind I would have to write a book and become an author if I was going to not get a job. And my goal was not to get an academic job. I didn't want to be a college teacher, because I knew I needed the motivation to get paid to write, which is a motivation I still have. And so the big move for me was coming from Dallas to LA, chasing after Ray Charles, who was my idol as a kid, and talking him into letting me write what I thought would be his biography, because in college I knew nothing about ghosting. I knew about biographers, but I didn't know that you made a living being a ghostwriter. It just wasn't part of my education. And so he didn't care. I mean, he would have gone either way, but I met an agent, and an agent told me, well, if you do a biography, you'll get maybe half as much as if you do an autobiography, because people are more interested in hearing Ray Charles describe his life in his voice than they are in your voice. So but I argued against it. I kind of said, no, I want to be a biographer. Ghostwriters don't win the Pulitzer Prize, and I want to win the Pulitzer Prize. And then he asked me a question which kind of changed my life. And the question was, which book would you rather read? A book written in Ray Charles's voice, in which he describes his life, or a book written by an egghead like you about Ray Charles? And I said, oh, I'd much rather read the book written by Ray Charles in his voice. And he said, well, you should write the book you want to read as opposed to the book that you believe you should write. And so I've been doing that. That was 1975-ish, 1976-ish. And that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to write books that I want to read. And most of them, not all of them, I've written biographies and songs and novels, but I've made my living and continue to make my living primarily as a ghostwriter. And in the beginning, it was challenging, and you can jump in at any time, Stan, so don't let me go on. So,
Okay. No, all right. All right, go ahead.
Feel free to interrupt me. But in the beginning, the ghostwriter didn't ring right for me because it didn't have the prestige. When the book comes out, it says, Ray Charles, with David Ritz, and, my name is half as big as his, and no one's paying attention to that. So it took me maybe 3 or 4 years to understand that it's a good genre, that it's a difficult genre. It's hard to challenge a voice. It's hard to become another person who you are not in a literary context. So I would say by the early 80s, I was comfortable with being a ghostwriter and knew it was kind of a gift. And now, again, when I say it's a gift, I do think I have natural talent for it. But like all forms of writing, it's all about revision. So it isn't that I just write out the book and I get the voice instantly. It can take me 4 drafts or 5 drafts or 8 drafts, so I'm constantly revising. But that mystery of why you can pick up a book of mine and start to read it and feel as though Etta James is talking to you, or Lenny Kravitz or B.B. King or one of these characters with whom I've worked, that's really the key to it. And how I accomplished that, I don't really know. So I love the name of your kind of program here, the secret to writing, because I want to know what the secret is. I'm still looking for it. I mean, I've got a couple of ideas, but that's all they are ideas.
Interesting. Well, I do have a book called The Secret to Writing, but that's a whole whole nother story.
Right.
So if I were to go back to sort of your earlier years, when you kind of made that turn to say, hey, I want to write a book, and then it was the question of a book or biography versus an autobiography. But what was there that made you even grab hold to the notion that you could really make a living and pursue this as a career? I mean, for example, people have all kinds of notions that, oh, maybe I can be a basketball player, maybe I can do this or that, but something had to have happened or clicked with
you. That's a great, I think that's a great question. There's 2 parts to the answer. One part is that I'm a hustler, and I will hustle after gigs, and I will call people and say, let me write your book. So I'm not shy about that. And my mom and dad were both salespeople. So I grew up with salespeople, and I have no shame in calling myself a salesman, and I'm selling me. So I like me and I like the product. So that's part of it, that I had a confidence that I could hustle after gigs and unapologetically go for it. But the other part of it was I discovered after fooling around with academia and doing some academic essays and fooling around with journalism that the tapestry of a book, is a large kind of tapestry. And I found that I was intrigued by trying to weave the tapestry together, and that engaged me and allowed me to sit in front of the computer, in those days, the typewriter, for 7 or 8 or 9 hours a day. And so that gave me the confidence that I could put in the time, that I could pay the dues to tell the news. In other words, because I'm kind of a hyper energetic person and I'm hyper enthusiastic and I love people. I love talking to a lot of people all the time, but would I have the concentration? And when I discovered ghostwriting and when I discovered the larger landscape of a book as opposed to an article or a short story or an academic essay, I observed myself discovering the discipline to do it. And the discipline, and this is really important, I think, for people who want to write, the discipline was born out of the joy of doing it. And I think were I not, because, you talk to a lot of writers and they all say it's agony or they become drunks or whatever. I mean, there's a million things that happen to authors,
Right.
which I understand but my major analogy for my artistic process is music, because I love music more than any other art form. And I understood jazz at an early age, which is to say I understood improvisation, which is to say I understood the joy of creating art uh, spontaneously, so that even in revision, I find joy. I like playing with words. And the word playing is important because it is like a kid who's playing with a toy. And play, when I type, I look at my keyboard as an instrument. I mean, I don't think I'm Herbie Hancock or Oscar Peterson, but I've learned to play that instrument. And so I like to play around. And another huge thing that has kept me going for whatever it's been now, 47 years and 65 books or something crazy. The other thing that's kept me going is I don't take it that seriously. I mean, I certainly take it seriously in that I have a contract, I have to write a book, uh, I have to fulfill my commitment, but I don't think it's Moby Dick or the New Testament or War and Peace. In other words, it's a book,
Right. Right.
and I'll try to do it as well as I can, but I'm still playing, and so that I think people who often leave the craft or stop writing are taking themselves and their work way too seriously, and there's Mr. Negativity that gets in your head that says, this is no good, who are you kidding, who are you trying to be? And so I think part of what we have to do as writers to keep ourselves from going crazy, which is always my main aim, my main goal is always not to go nuts. I think the main thing we have to do is deal with Mr. Negativity or the devil or whoever we want to call this force that will knock us off track.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the really important things that I've learned as a writer to negotiate with Mr. Negativity. I mean, I can't destroy him because he's too powerful, and human beings, that as a human being, I have inherently a negative voice in my head. But what I try to do is talk to him and kind of say, I know you want me to stop writing. I know you want me to feel like this is not worthwhile, that I'm not Stephen King. But at the very same time, I'm going to put you in the back seat of the car. I'm not going to turn the wheel over to you, because if I do, you're going to drive off the cliff. So I'm going to drive. I'm going to hear you kibitzing from the back seat and telling me this is no good. You'll never get done. The editor will hate it. All the negative things you have to tell me. But I'm going to try to right size you. In other words, and I think there's a huge kind of nuance here, which is, I think if we try to destroy the negative voice that keeps us moving ahead as writers, it empowers that voice, because Mr. Negativity wants to get into a power struggle with us. So he, or Mrs. Negativity, I shouldn't genderize it, becomes more and more powerful. But I think if we learn, or at least in my case, I can only speak for myself, but in my own case, I've tried to learn to peacefully negotiate with those elements that would keep me from doing my work. And like I say, I'm always trying to proclaim joy when I feel joy.
Yes.
I'm always trying to announce joy when I'm feeling joy.
Yes.
And I think gratitude is a huge, huge part of my operative modality. And I try to remind myself that I am grateful to have this work. I'm grateful to have met whoever it is that I'm working with. It's an honor to be able to help them, give them a literary voice. And so I think that's one of the reasons why in 47 or 48 years, whatever it's been, I've never had a writer's block. I've never been blocked. And it's because of this, I guess, kind of complicated thing I've been trying to describe.
Wow. I feel like you're not only dropping gems about writing, but frankly, just kind of about life. Particularly, I was struck by your comments relating to being grateful and gratitude. But picking up on what you just said, you talked about sort of writers and maybe not taking themselves too seriously. And so I want to pivot from that and ask the question of what, in your view, would you consider to be the 2 or 3 key success factors that make a person a successful writer, beyond what you've already said? And maybe you've
No. I mean, I can talk about this stuff all night long and kind of bore everybody to death, but because I think about it all the time, because it's all I do is write. I mean, other than hang out with my wife and kids and grandkids. I think tenacity is extremely important. I think you have to be tenacious, and you have to deal with rejection, and you have to develop a relationship with rejection, because you will be rejected. I'm rejected now, and that's just the truth. I mean, there are books that I want to do that publishers and editors tell me they're not going to give me a contract for, or I'll turn in a book and the manuscript will be rejected because they don't like the way it's written, and I have to rewrite it. So in other words, unless you have some divine career where everything you turn is loved and sells millions of copies, 99.99% of us get rejected. So if you don't have a relationship with rejection, a healthy relationship, which means that you will not allow rejection to stop you, I think it's important to allow yourself to feel the rejection. I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that it hurts, that you're a human being. But then I think at some point you pick yourself up and you say, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to go back. I'm going to keep on keeping on and all that stuff. So, the song Ain't No Stopping Us Now and all those songs are really important to me. And I think, so I would say that and tenacity, the other thing I think that's key to my having had a good career is I always aim for simplicity and clarity. Now, I don't
Mm,
always get there. I don't always
yeah.
get there. And
Hmm.
simplicity isn't always a simple thing, but I'm always asking myself the question, am I writing in a way that's digestible and am I writing in a way that is clear?
Yes.
Because now this is just me. All authors, and I like esoteric authors. I like James Joyce, and there's a lot of authors I like who are very difficult to read. But
Yes.
I personally want to be understood by a mass audience, and I want my writing to be clear and sincere and easy to read. I want
Yes.
I want to be easy to read. That's a goal of mine. Now, again, that ties in with the commercial aspect of me. So I never divorce the two because I want to make a living as a writer. And if you're
Hmm.
hard to understand, you're not going to get an audience. But I don't see that as a compromise. In other words, I see um, kind of a healthy marriage between appreciating your audience's need to read with pleasure
Yes.
and the challenge of telling your story in a
Hmm.
way that will bring that pleasure. I don't feel
Yeah.
like I'm compromising. I feel like that's a good marriage of two different elements. So I would say tenacity is really important, and also for me having the aim of clarity and simplicity. And from a technical point of view,
Hmm.
and this happens to me every day, I'll be in the middle of a paragraph, and
Yes.
I'll be trying to figure out a sentence, and it's not working, and I'll stop and I'll go, what am I trying to say? Say it as clearly and as simply as I can, and I will reform the sentence in a much less complex way. Uh,
Yes.
and also, I think now here's what I cannot explain, but I think is really important,
Mm.
which is the groove, because
Mm.
to me, because of my love of music, particularly funk and jazz and everything else, the groove is everything. I
Yes.
mean, it's just so I'm looking as I'm writing, I'm trying to hear the beat. I'm trying to hear a rhythmic pulsation that will not only make my writing easy to read, but provide a drum track for the reader so the reader gets grooved up as well and is turning pages and feeling as though there's a pleasurable kind of dance um, that's happening. Now,
Yeah.
how you create a groove is different for all people. For me, it's a combination of long uh, sentences followed by very short declarative sentences. Uh,
Hmm.
and again, I'm not sure, but I am consciously listening for a groove. I'm
Yeah.
consciously want my writing to have a rhythmic pulse, pulse, pulsation.
That's I personally appreciate, especially appreciate uh, your approach, and I will say just happen to share a belief in what you're saying. So I'm like nodding and taking it all in and just jumping out of my seat almost literally as I listen to you. But with what that being said, David, I mean, take us into your world for a moment. Beyond, you've already you've already invited us in, almost literally and figuratively as I check out your space. But what's your routine? I mean, what's your process? I mean, are you up at do you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and run around the block and then go back to and start typing,
No, I don't work. I work a lot.
yeah,
I work a lot. It's an interesting kind of process. I appreciate the question, appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And again, everybody is different, so this is not some pontification that, nobody take any sort of notes here. But
Okay.
I believe in the spirit, and I'm often moved, and I try to write when I'm in a spirit. Now that's a combination plate, because yes, I want a spirit to be moving within me, but I'm also disciplined. And even if the spirit isn't there in the beginning, I'm going to make myself write anyway, because I know that sometimes, like the old people in church are always kind of saying, God might not be there when you want him, but he's always right on time. So I know that the spirit might not be there when I'm calling the spirit, but that the spirit is going to come to me, and I'm going to get a groove and a flow going. So it's a combination of discipline, but also of a spiritual kind of prayer, which is to say, let my heart be open, let me approach this work with love and gratitude, and let me start to sing. Uh, let me start to do it. But from a practical point of view, I don't like getting up early. Now, again, maybe because I've hung out with jazz musicians and blues musicians my whole life, but I usually don't get up to 8 or 9. I usually don't start working till 10 or 11. I usually write from 11 to 2 or 3. I take out off an hour. I usually don't go out for lunch because I want my afternoon time. Then I usually write from maybe 4 to 6. I try not to write at night. I write every day of the week. I don't take a day off. And I usually write 3 or 4 books at the same time. And I'm able to compartmentalize. I'm not sure exactly how, but I find that having multi projects is helpful because one inspires the other. I get off of writing 2 pages on one book, and I'm all happy and worked up, and that energy will apply to the next book that I'm working on. But one important tip for me is, or tip coming from me, is that if you are writing a story of any kind, fiction, nonfiction, it's important, I think, to keep your head in the story, even if the story doesn't seem to be coming along as quickly as you want. Sometimes to get a paragraph out on a day, or even a sentence, is a big deal, because it means you have not abandoned the story. And I think I need to remain engaged with the story. And often when I go to bed that night, I will be uh, thinking about the story. I think if you're truly emotionally committed to the story, then you will do unconscious work about the story that
Mm.
counts. In other words, when you're asleep, or when you're walking the dog or taking out the trash, uh, even though you may not consciously be dealing with the characters or the facts of the story, you probably are. You just
Yes.
don't kind of know you are. So I think, you know, you have to embrace the work, and some people can work 8 hours a day, other people can work 2 hours a day, other people can work an hour a day, some people can work 5 days a week, they have to take off 2 days. I'm one of these nuts that have to work every day. uh, One is because I'm disciplined. Two is because I'm compulsive, which may be not such a great thing, because, but I am. I'm a compulsive worker, and and a recovering addict from a lot of uh, things. So I have a lot of energy.
Mhm.
I don't get high anymore, and I don't drink or drug. So um, and even when I was getting high, it's been 32 years or something. But even when I was getting high, I would work. But now that I've been sober for a long, long time, I've got a lot of energy,
Yeah.
and I try to use that energy as positively as I can. And here's a big thing too. I look at it as a party. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but to me, um, I'm working on a book now with Layla Hathaway, Donny Hathaway's daughter, who was a soul singer back in the day, and she's a young soul singer now, and she's a lovely person. She and I have started working on a book about her dad, who died at a young age, and she didn't really know him, and he died when she was 10. So, but anyway, when I open up the book and I think of the work I have, it's a party to me. I mean, I just assume work as I would go to a party, and so I can't emphasize enough the joy of creativity as opposed to the burden of creativity or the burden of having to work. And I think that's why I say I think we need to. I think writers who want to be happy and have a successful life as a writer, I really urge them to look for happy writers as sort of models, because the old because there have been so many let me just turn this up. There have been so many models in the past that look as writing as this kind of gruesome task that you have to grind out every day. And there is a grind. And again, I'm not denying the grind, but the challenge is to find the groove in the grind. And once you find the groove in the grind, then you're going, and you're experiencing some visceral pleasure in the process.
Right. I want to just talk for a second about respect, the book Respect,
Okay.
and I guess I'm always listening to Aretha when I go run, and I try to run every day.
Right.
And so I'm listening to her music, and I have the book, and it's like, I think, cover to the cover, it's like 520 pages, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate the goal that you mentioned of simplicity and clarity in your writing. But David, how do you, in writing a book of that length, how do you know when you've written enough, that you have enough of the story, and sort of A, and B, in terms of how do you put it together, like with such a book of that length?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to give you an answer you're not going to be crazy about, but it's the only answer that I really have. I think most stories have a length that you have to discover, and it's an intuitive thing. Now, in Aretha's case, she lived a long time and had a multi-decade career, and is an enormously important historical figure, both in musical history and American history. So
Yes.
there, I knew it was a big book. And I had done her autobiography before, which I didn't like because I didn't think she was candid with me. So I knew her. On top of having interviewed a lot of people who knew her for years, I actually knew her. I worked with her for 2 years. So I had an enormous amount of information, both personal interviews I had done with her and interviews I had done with her producers and her brother and her sisters and her cousin, and on and on and on. So I knew from the get-go this was going to be a big book, and I don't try to anticipate the end. And here's something else, which is what's going to make some people crazy. I don't outline. Now, I'm not telling.
What?
I know. I'm not telling people not to outline. I'm not telling people not to outline, and please outline if you outline. But in school, I hated doing outlines.
Uh-huh.
They made me nervous, and they
Okay.
artificial to me. So I just start. Now, again, I do all the research first. and I have the research organized, different parts of her life. But I just start writing page one and see where it goes. And that goes back to the jazz thing, where I really am an improviser. I mean, I really allow the beat and the spirit of the moment. I mean, a deeply, I am a, this sounds arrogant, but I really am a jazz man. I mean, that's the art form that speaks to me most clearly. And I heard it when I was young, and I heard it and loved it, not because of anything political or racial. I just loved it and got it. So that when I start to play, I allow one page to lead to another. And when the chapter seems like it's completed, I stop. Now, again, it isn't that I don't go back. I go back, I revise, I switch chapters around. I mean, it doesn't come out perfectly the first time, but the initial act is an act of improvisation.
Sure.
And consequently, you can go through all my papers. There are no outlines. And it's a thing where in school, it intimidated me. And so even novels, I wrote a novel last year, and I didn't know what was going to happen one day to the next. I mean, I had a general idea of the story,
Yeah.
but I just came to the computer and said, okay, what's happening now? Where are we going? And and again, Mr. Negativity comes in here and attacks me and tells me, you have messed this story up. You've written yourself in a corner. You don't know what you're doing. You should stop and outline it and get to the ending. And I resist and I say, no, if it's terrible, it's terrible. I can live with that. But this is my methodology. I'm being true to how I operate as an artist. Leave me alone for the time being and let me continue to improvise. So, and other books, I've just written a book with a rhythm and blues singer named Kem. I don't know if you know him, Kem. He's sort of things like Al Jarreau. He's a great.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Kem is young.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in his early 50s, and his book is relatively short. And again, it's a ghostwritten book. I think it's a really, really good book. And he's a great artist and a great guy to work with. But it's he's got another half of his life to live. He had a very dramatic childhood, and a lot of that is that. And another interesting thing, I did a book with Lenny Kravitz a couple of years ago, and we got and he had a very complicated childhood and a very interesting childhood. And we got to a point where he finally got his first record deal after going through his childhood and his young adulthood and this, and we stopped. And we said, we don't want to write about his glamorous rock and roll career. That's another book. And I didn't know that was going to happen. It just kind of happened that we felt,
Right.
well, this is enough. Let's just do this, and we'll do part two in 4 or 5 years later on down the road. So things like that can happen, and I just try to be open and free, and let the story end when it feels like it should end. It's if we have time, I just want to go back to this ghost writing thing because I was once at a conference in Austin for South by Southwest, and I was on a panel with a bunch of other authors, and one of them, other biographers, and one of them attacked me and said, David Ritz shouldn't be on this panel because he's a ghost writer, and that's a subgenre, and that's a hacky genre, and we're biographers, and he's a hack. Of course, I wanted to kill the guy, but I couldn't. I mean, it was a room full of international journalists, and I turned to him and I said, who wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X? And he said, well, Alex Haley. And, the autobiography of Malcolm X is, a classic. It's a great book and unarguably a ghostwritten book by, and he said, well, that doesn't count. That's an exception. And I said, well, what about the Bible? Who wrote the Bible? And he said, I don't know. How would you answer it? And I said, well, it's the Holy Ghost. It's a ghost written book, right? I mean, we don't know who the authors. I mean, so that I know all that sounds like a joke, but the reason it's important for me is that I think the act of ghostwriting, actually the act of all writing, as far as I'm concerned, is a spiritual experience in which I try to invite spirit in, and I try to allow spirit to drive me and to guide me and to protect me from the negative voices in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's um it's a spiritual thing, you know. I mean, and when I say that, I don't mean it in any, and I'm not theologically orthodox about anything, and I believe in a lot of stuff, and I don't think there's any one way, and so on and so forth. So it isn't that I ascribe to any individual fundamental thing, but I do think good writing is created by a spirit that I have to invoke and nurture and cultivate and respect and appreciate.
Sure.
And I think that's why I'm still doing it because I don't have to do it now if I didn't want to. I mean, you know, my kids are grown and educated, and I'm okay, but I do it because I'm still driven. And again, I am still driven to make money. That part is certainly true. I like to earn money, and that's really important. But equally as important is I feel like I'm driven by a spirit that we can call
Yeah.
by any number of names. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but the spirit is inaudible, it's invisible, but it's palpable. You know, I can feel it. I can feel it when I work.
David, um what has been your, in terms of all the work that you've done, what project are you most proud of? And maybe it's more than one, but if you could single out one or two.
Well, you know, I wrote um, sexual healing with Marvin Gaye, and you know, I love Marvin, and I still listen to him all the time. I still listen to Aretha all the time. Also, I mean, I listen to music all the time, but I love Marvin. He was a very uh, aristocratic, beautiful man when he was right. You know, and most of the time when I was with him, he was right. And that song, the way it came out, and the impact it's had on me and other people, um, was a big deal. I also wrote his biography, which is the
Mm-hmm.
first biography I wrote because it began as a ghostwritten project, and then, you know, as everyone knows, he was killed by his dad and so on, and so he wasn't there to approve an autobiography. But um, I had known him for years, and I turned it into a biography called Divided Soul, and I think I probably cherish my relationship with Marvin and the work we did together. I mean, I cherish the work I did with Ray Charles and BB King and the people that I'm working with now, and so I've worked with a lot of wonderful people, but everybody has their artist, you know, and I guess Marvin Gaye is my artist, and when anxiety attacks me, as it often does, and when I feel I need comfort, I listen to Marvin, and he had a huge influence on my life. He was a very kind of spiritual person, and again, when he was right, I think he was a conduit um, uh, of spiritual wisdom, and was had and now I feel like I'm about to do the altar call, but I won't. But in any event, he kind of changed. In other words, Marvin really changed my life in many, many ways, and kind of took me from being a doubter to a believer through his music and through sort of being with him. I mean, Ray Charles had a big impact on me, but but Ray, which was my first book, he was kind of a scary guy. I mean, he was tough and brilliant and like an army militaristic disciplinarian, and I was really had to be on my toes and work hard, and I was scared of making a mistake, and it turned out good. I mean, the book I think turned out great, and it was my first book, and I was always grateful to him for giving me the chance. But it wasn't anybody you could just like hang out with and kick it and chop it up. And Marvin wasn't. He was like an older brother, whereas like Ray was like a stern uncle.
Yeah.
And so Marvin comforted me a great deal. But I've had largely positive experiences with the people that I've worked with, but again, it's a little different for me because not all writers are collaborators. I guess that's a word that people that don't want to use the ghostwriter word use, and they say, "Oh, I'm not a ghostwriter. I'm a collaborator," which is also an accurate word because you are collaborating. You aren't in charge of the book. They get to cut whatever they want to because it's their book. I like ghostwriting as a word because I try to be invisible. So when you read the book, you don't feel my presence. You feel the presence of the star. So
No, I got you there. And one, David, can you clarify when as you were talking, you would say when, and you're referring to Marvin Gaye, when he was right. So just for my benefit and the audience, what do you mean by that? And then the bigger question, follow-up question, and really the bigger question I wanted to ask you is, you're working with these mega A-list people.
yeah.
What is it about David Ritz that you think that where these celebrities are sort of entrusting you to tell their story? So
Well,
those two
yeah,
things.
When I said when Marvin was right, he had great mood volatility and was basically bipolar to a degree, and he could get down and depressed and super, we couldn't even talk to him because he just didn't want to engage. And so when I said when he was right was when he was coherent, when he was not depressed, when he had achieved some emotional equilibrium. And there could be a conversation and an exchange. And that was often the case. That was often the case. Later in his life, he became more and more disturbed. The answer to your other question is, how have these people I think they know that I love them. I mean, I think love, we haven't even used that word yet, but that should be used a lot. I mean, I try to operate out of love. I'm quick to tell artists that I love them, that I love their work, that I admire them, because I do. I'm not afraid to tell them that. I think they don't hear it as often as you would imagine. I'm genuine when I tell them that. I think I am naturally curious. I think my ego is, particularly the last 10, 20 years, this has been a lifetime struggle to get my ego under control, but I don't have to talk now. All this I've been talking about me, so here's the big contradiction. And I don't mind talking about me. I like me, and it's fine to talk about me. But when I'm with an artist, I don't talk about me very much, and I talk about them, and they respond to my natural curiosity. I try to be patient. Lots of times the interviews are canceled. I don't get angry. I try to be compassionate. I try to be loving. I try to be entertained. I come with a lot of enthusiasm, which is natural, because I do love my work, as I've said before. And when we begin a project, I tell whoever I'm working with that we're going to have fun. It's going to be a party. It's hard, but let's just have a good time doing it. So, I mean, I think I'm basically a positive idiot who is not afraid to express my positivity, and people respond to that. And also I come prepared. If lots of times I know the work of the artist, but lots of times I don't, and so I learn it before the interviews start. So I try to do as much research as I can, so the questions I ask are intelligent and not naive, and show that I have taken the time to learn all I can about the person. And now I want to learn what's not out there
Mm-hmm.
in public, and I want to learn the private. But I try to bond. Just as you and I are kind of bonding now, you're getting me. This is who I am, and I try to be as open-hearted as I can. And again, I treat it like a spiritual experience. I mean, I think I want the spirit between me and whoever I'm working with to sort of manifest itself and bring us warmth and trust and all the things required for a dialogue that's going to yield a good book.
Yes. Interesting. You've worked with traditional publishers, and I guess you do now, but
Yeah.
a lot of people are self-publishing books.
Mm-hmm.
The self-publishing world and industry has just exploded,
Yeah.
thanks to technology.
Right.
From your lens, is that a good thing or bad thing?
I think it's good. I mean, I like changing technology. I like Kindles. I began typing on a manual typewriter and went to an electric typewriter. I was grateful. I went to a word processor. I was grateful. I went to blah, blah, blah. So I've liked evolving technology as an author. Publishing will evolve. I'm not afraid of self-publishing taking over the world. If they take over the world, they take over the world. I think the more voices out there, the better. I am not uh, the old publishing paradigm. I mean, for me, the paradigm has been the way I get paid is major publishers give me an advance for a book, and I live on the advance. And that's been my financial paradigm for all these years. Now, I still have that paradigm because I'm still working with, major stars and major publishers, but I have friends of mine who have published their own novels and their own books, and I think it's great. And just as in music, you can have your own studio on your computer and go on YouTube, and so I think the more outlets for creative expression, the better. But I don't think it changes anything I've been talking about. I mean, in other words, what I've really been talking about is treating writing as a spiritual experience and trying to communicate with people, if that's your aim. I mean, if your aim is just to talk to yourself that's fine too. I mean, I'm not against that. But if you join me in wanting to communicate with other people when you write, I think whether it's a self-published book or a book put out by a major publisher, nothing changes. In other words, you still want to be clear, you still want to be understood, you still want to be simple. You still have to learn the mystery of what makes a good story. And if you ask me that, my answer is I don't know. I mean, I know it when I read it, I know it when I write it. But if it wasn't, if I would resolve the mystery, it would no longer be a mystery. And I believe in mysteries. I believe in mysticism. I believe in mystics. So all those MYS words apply here. And it goes back to why I think the process of writing is so intriguing and so compelling, because it involves mystery. And so I am not one who adheres to cardinal rules, even grammar, for example. I'm a traditional grammarian, if that's a word. Boy, it would be terrible to mess up the word grammar as a noun, but I think I just did. But any event, I think I learn grammar. I believe in grammar, but I think grammar is very personal. You may use a dash when I use a comma. I might use a semicolon while you use a colon, and so on and so forth. So I think all these things are extremely personal, but I think it's important to learn your craft, and this is a craft because it is mysterious, um, in which rules don't always apply to everybody. Like outline the book before you work. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. But let me see if I can kind of wind up with a conclusion that seems coherent and works in some of the ideas that I've talked about. So generally, I would say in my old age, I am grateful for having lived the life of a writer. I encourage people to write, all people to write. I think the writing process is a beautiful thing. I think to express yourself in words is a beautiful challenge. I think it's easier than you might believe it is. I think I encourage people not to judge what they write, to allow themselves to breathe, to understand that revision is an intrinsic part of writing. You can always go back and fix what needs to be done, but that the impulse to create on paper or on a computer, that which wasn't there before, is kind of a divine instinct. And I think the other thing I love about writing and why I'm so grateful to be a writer is because I am often being taught by what I write in ways that are wholly unexpected. I'm always learning new things about the people that I'm working with, and I'm always learning new things about stories which I thought I understood, but when I put them on paper, become much larger or deeper than I had originally anticipated. So I think the writing life, to live as a writer, is a beautiful life. And the other thing I would warn people against is, this old cliche of compare and despair. I think all comparisons are odious. If I start comparing myself to Ernest Hemingway or William Shakespeare, I'll jump in the well and kill myself. I mean, so I think we each, just as we each have an individual speaking voice, we each have an individual voice on the page. And also, I strongly try to resist hierarchies. This kind of writing is more important than that kind of writing is more important than that kind of writing. I think they're also very destructive, and sort of negative, and keep you from getting where you need to be. I don't think ghostwriting is a higher form than the epic poem, or the novel is a higher form than the screenplay or the short. I mean, they're all different genres.
Yes.
They're all good genres. For example, writing emails. I like to write emails. I try to be a good email writer. I like to write
Yes.
a business letter. I like business correspondence. I like memos. I try to write memos well. And I take pride in being a good memo writer. I like to write speeches. I often ghostwrite speeches for people. That's a treat for me. I think the 4-minute speech is an interesting form. I think the 2-minute speech is an interesting form. So that I think we, I just feel like we just don't need to kick ourselves in the head, which is what most of us do half the time. And we just need to be grateful to have these minds and these hearts. And I think the point is to let the heart go ahead of the mind and let the heart drive the mind and align ourselves spiritually, so there is a flow that's
Mm-hmm.
a natural flow, and
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately gives us pleasure, the way a painter might have pleasure when he or she puts the brush to the easel and makes some strokes. So I'm just all for, you know, finding joy in writing.
David, final question. What do you hope your legacy will be?
That I made a good that I made a good pair of shoes, that I learned to be a good cobbler, that I stayed with it. Um, and some of these shoes will go out of fashion. Most of them will. Maybe a couple of styles will still endure. I don't really worry about my legacy. I'm not even sure I have a legacy. I mean, I think I've contributed something to the history of African American music. I mean, now there's a book on Jimmy Scott, who I love, and a book on Etta James, who I love. So, I mean, I'm proud of that,
Mm-hmm.
those parts of history might not be there had I not chased chased after Etta James and all these different people. But I'm not. I'm more like the books that I'm doing now, and uh, you know, the vast majority of my books will be forgotten, and that's fine. And uh, legacy. Uh, I think my main legacy is uh, for good and for bad, both positively and negatively, has been the people, the impact I've had on people I've interacted. And if my books have had an impact on people when they read them, I don't really know about that. I mean, maybe they have, maybe they haven't. I mean, sometimes I get letters, but I'm not, and it goes back to the hierarchy because I'm not trying to, um, I'm, I'm trying to let my work channel other stories and other voices that are not my own, so that, in other words, I'm more interested in the legacy of Marvin Gaye or Donny Hathaway or Aretha Franklin than I am in my own. And like I said, I've written one short book about my life that's kind of a meditation, but it's certainly not an autobiography, because I'm not. That's just not anything that kind of drives me to do. But so and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for having found work that still nourishes me at an old age. And I think we'll continue to. I mean, I don't see myself ever stopping, uh, because it just brings me too much satisfaction. So
Mm-hmm.
don't look for me to retire anytime soon. Now, people may be tired of. I mean, I may not get any more gigs at a certain point, but I'm even there. I'm confident that I'll still be able to kind of hustle up a gig here and there.
Right. Well, David, wow, this has been amazing. And I just really want to thank you so much
My,
for
my
taking the
pleasure.
time being here and sharing. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Great. Well, thank you again, and I wish you well, and I hope that we'll talk again soon.
You bet. Take care. Bye
All
now.
right.